Smile, they said. Things could get worse. So I did, and they did. Welcome to Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington on this last Wednesday night of the month. And it's actually the penultimate Wednesday night of 2017. I love using that word. We are here to talk about the astrology of December of 2017. And there are some pretty significant things to talk about. And before I jump in, there are a few things that I want to just mention because I can. Couple of upcoming things. I have the Brighton Bush Hot Springs Annual Retreat, which I have been doing for years. And this is Brighton Bush Hot Springs in the old growth forest of Central Oregon. I've been doing an annual workshop for the first 7 years with my now passed on partner, Jeff Jower. And this will be my third year on my own. Oh my God. And it's conscious creation with astrology. And it's basically looking at the astrology of the year ahead. This year it is on January 5th, 6th, and 7th. It's always the first weekend after the new year. And we start off on Friday night. We look at an overview of the year and then talk about the outer planetary aspects for 2018, kind of like what I do here every month, but instead looking more globally at the entire year and looking at that framed in major planetary cycles. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we plow through the charts of the participants. This event usually, actually for the past several years, has sold out. If you are interested, you should think about registering soon. It will top out at somewhere around 25 participants. And I think the last I knew there were 17 or 18. And so if you're thinking about doing this, get your name in. But on Saturday and Sunday, we'll do the charts of the participants and basically plow through them. It's a very fascinating experience to be able to see 25 charts of people who are there and have interaction with them and talking about the year ahead. So it's not quite the same as getting your chart done, but every chart gets some attention, and we look at the transits. This is a picture that all these pictures are pictures I took, by the way. This is Brighton Bush in January after a snowstorm. It's not always snowy there. Maybe half the years I've been there in the winter it is, but if it's not snowy, it's wet. And it's wet not only on the outside, but as you may know, Brighton Bush houses about 200 people for conferences. There's always simultaneous events going on. The food is absolutely fantastic. It's vegetarian, all you can eat, Birkenstock food, heavy, real food. And if you have special diets, they will take care of that. And then, of course, there are the legendary hot tubs, which is where some of the best teaching occurs after class hours and on until the wee early morning hours. The hot tubs are all over the property, and they are delicious in the wintertime. The cost is $140 for the workshop. Lodging, depending, is about $80 to $120 a night, but that includes 3 full meals a day. And so that's the Brighton Bush thing. Registration is limited, and there's a number to call, but you can just go to brightonbush.com. And for those of you who are watching this online, the link will appear somewhere. All right. So that's the first weekend in January. Back in Seattle that week on on the 11th, which is a Thursday, I will be doing a lecture at the Washington State Astrology Association, which is the oldest statewide astrology association in the United States. I think it's been meeting the second Thursday night of every month for probably somewhere around 55 years. I was the president of this organization for a couple years back in the early 90s, and they have lecturers from all around the United States and the world. Last month, Lynn Bell was here from Paris. It was a great talk. And I'll be doing the January talk there, actually also on the astrology of 2018. Then on that Saturday, the 13th, and you can find them online or send me an email and I can, aim you at their information. They're on Facebook also. If you go to Facebook and search for Washington Astrologers, you'll find them. But on Saturday the 13th, I'll be doing an all-day workshop. They meet at both the Thursday night and the Saturday event at the Puget Sound Yacht Club, which is near Gasworks Park on the northern edge of Lake Union. So that's up to January. Then in mid-March, the 22nd through the 26th, is NORWAC, the Northwest Astrology Conference. Most astrologers agree that this is the best of all of the regional conferences. This will be my 2018. I think, will be my Saturn return. It'll be my 29th NORWAC, and I've probably spoken at about 25 of them. I get put to rest every few years for a year, but I will be speaking at this one. There will be astrologers lecturing there from all over the world, and you can find information online at NORWAC, NORWAC.net, NORWAC.net. That's March 22nd through 26th. That event is normally held on Memorial Day weekend, except every 4 or 5 years, there's the grandmother of all astrology conferences, and that's UAC, the United Astrology Conference. That's on Memorial Day weekend this year, and that is in Chicago. And if you go to uacastrology.com, you can find information about that. There's 140 lecturers at this gonzo event at every given time slot, 4 times, 4 a day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. There are 18 different lectures to choose from, depending upon whether you're interested in psychological astrology, spiritual astrology, financial astrology, beginners astrology, advanced techniques, research, historical, esoteric, Hellenistic, Greek, medieval, Vedic. It's a huge palette, and so that's uacastrology.com. Also, as some of you know, I've been doing workshops for an organization run by my dear friend Evelyn Roberts called Heaven and Earth Shop. Let's try that again. Called Heaven and Earth Workshops. Last year, I did a workshop for them in India, and we were in southwestern India, Goa, and then in Hampi, which is an ancient city in India. I'm not going to be in India this year. I'll be back in Bali. I'll tell you that about that in just a moment. But Evelyn is leading a workshop. No, she's producing the workshop that is being led by Caroline Casey. Does anyone know Caroline Casey? Will you promise me to go online and Google her and listen to some of her stuff, because she's extraordinary. I like to say about Caroline, when she's talking astrology, it's like listening to John Coltrane play the sax. This woman riffs. Anyhow, she will be leading an 8-day workshop in India, and there are still registrations available. And so if you are crazy enough to be able to book a trip to India, airfare is not as expensive as you may think, and everything is taken care of from airplane arrival to airplane leaving, go check out Heaven and Earth Workshops. That's all one word, heavenandearthworkshops.com. Look at the events and the India event, Caroline Casey, and it'll be quite a trip. I know this. And the places are magical. It's the same venues as I taught at last year, and I wish I was going there. I shouldn't say that, because during that same time, I'm going to Kolkata and speaking at an astrology conference there. Oh my God. Okay, but I'm not going to tell you about that one because you're not going. But for people online, I will put the link down here for the astrology conference that I will be speaking at in Kolkata, India. A quick word about Bali, and then we'll get into the material for tonight. And that is, I will be doing my, I think, 6th week-long retreat/workshop in Bali at a very magical retreat center outside of Ubud in the jungle. This is an amazing event. Every one of the last, I think maybe this is the 7th. I don't know now. But they're all transformative. They're wonderful. There's no date scheduled yet, but it's probably going to be a year from right now. It's probably going to be in mid-late November or early December, and hopefully by then Mount Agung will have settled down. And Mount Agung is the tallest mountain. It's about 3,000 meters, about 8,000 or 9,000 feet, and it's been dormant for a half a century. And right now it is there are plumes coming out of Mount Agung that are like 2 miles into the sky. And the island is definitely in a little bit of trauma, but the people there are so amazing, and we will see what happens. But Bali next year, November or December, dates to follow. Okay, I'm done. Actually, we're starting. December is a really powerful month for a number of reasons. Most of the reasons that it is powerful are going to center around Saturn. Saturn is the key player in the month, but Saturn is not by himself or herself. We normally think of Saturn as Father Time, but Saturn is also the crone. It's also the old wise woman. And in an attempt these days to right several thousand years of patriarchal sexism and gender issues that we're all facing out there, it would be remiss if I only spoke about Saturn as the Grim Reaper, Father Time, Kronos, and although he's often represented as a male, she is also the wise woman. And in fact, in astrology, every planet connects with a sign, and every sign connects with a planet. In the ancient tradition, this is called the system of rulerships. I like to use the word association because I'm a New Age wimp. But I don't believe personally that a planet rules a sign. I think there's an integral entanglement of energy. Now, as the slower moving outer planets were discovered starting in the 18th century, Uranus, then Neptune, and then Pluto, each of these planets were observed and then put into a place in the hierarchy. So that until they were discovered, each sign, except for the ones that were ruled by or associated with the sun and the moon, each sign had, let me say it the other way around. Each planet was associated with 2 different signs. So that, for example, Mercury was associated with Gemini and Virgo. Venus was associated with Taurus and Libra. Mars was associated with Aries and Scorpio. Jupiter was associated with Pisces and Sagittarius. And Saturn was associated with Capricorn and Aquarius. Now, for many of you who have been studying astrology here in the 21st century, you know that Aquarius is ruled by or connected to Uranus. But it also is connected to Saturn. Uranus kind of came in and, if not replaced Saturn, at least moved him aside a little bit in our modern minds. The same is true with Pluto and Scorpio. That Mars was set aside a bit, and Pluto is often now associated with Scorpio, and the same with Neptune replacing Jupiter a bit in its relationship with Sagittarius. And it's actually, this is a topic that we could explore for hours as to what does that mean. For example, when Mars used to be associated with Scorpio for thousands of years, now Pluto comes in and Mars is only associated with Aries, and what happens? Mars loses some of its emotionality. You see how that happens? Because Mars used to be associated also with watery, passionate Scorpio, and all of a sudden now Pluto's there and Mars is just, want to fight Aries. I say that as an Aries who does not want to fight. Okay. Now, the reason why this is so important to us this evening, this month, is that for the first time in its 29-year cycle, Saturn is returning to a sign that is one of its primary rulership signs or domiciles, its home sign. And it's not just going to return in December to Capricorn for the first time in 29 years, or actually 27 years. But from Capricorn, it'll go into Aquarius, which is also its home sign. So for the next 5 years, because Saturn spends about 2.5 years in each sign, because it takes about 30 years for it to go around once, for the next 5 years, Saturn is going to be, I don't want to say ruling the show, but it's going to be very important to everything. Got it? All right. So we got to get a couple of points down to get to where we're going with all of this, because the teaching for December is very much about Saturn. It's very much about the relationship between Saturn and other planets. And it's also, we're going to be talking a little bit about the relationship between Jupiter and Saturn, and I'll explain why in a bit. But coming back to this Saturn moving into Capricorn, the last time Saturn was in Capricorn was in the late 80s, early 90s, which was a huge shift on the planet. I mean, this was the end of the Soviet Union. It was the fall of the Berlin Wall. There were map makers said that it was a good time to be a map maker because you could make a lot of money, because every map that you made a month later was obsolete because there were new countries and new lines and new national lines and so on. But the difference between Saturn moving into Capricorn now and Saturn moving into Capricorn then is very important. Although I'm a fan of looking backwards in history to kind of see the repetitive cycles. The difference is that when Saturn was at the end of Sagittarius moving into Capricorn, there was a cluster of planets that were outer planets that were very rarely together in that focus. And what I'm talking about is the triple conjunction of Neptune, a 165-year cycle, Uranus, an 84-year cycle, and Saturn, a 29-year cycle. The three of those planets in the late 80s and on through 93, even into 94, the late 80s, early 90s resounded of this outer planet cycle of Uranus and Neptune being met by Saturn coming through it. Now, as Saturn is moving from Sagittarius into Capricorn, it doesn't have that heavy weight of outer planet energy attached to it. However, it has a bee buzzing in its bonnet. And that would be bzzz. Mercury. So, what we have here is a chart for, let's make this a chart for right now. A chart for November 29th at 7:45 p.m. here in Redmond, Washington. We can see that the moon is in Aries, moving toward a conjunction with Uranus. And actually Mars in Libra is moving toward an opposition with Uranus. And in fact, we can also see that the moon over the next few days will move opposite the sun. So we're coming into a full moon. And this is really what we're going to be talking about, because this is the opening volley for the month of December, with the exception of this little thing up here. And this little thing up here is Mercury at 28 degrees of Sagittarius and Saturn at 27 degrees of Sagittarius. Yesterday, Mercury, moving at the very end of Sagittarius, lined up with Saturn, as it does every year. And normally when it does that, it lasts for a day. However, this year is different, and it's different in a very peculiar way. What I want to show you is Mercury, the Sun, and Saturn, and nothing else. Okay, so all the other planets are there. Trust me. But what we're looking at here is Mercury and Saturn and the Sun. Now, if you were to think of this, this is a chart that shows Aries rising just for the sake of simplicity, so we don't have to think about houses. But if you think about this chart, this is really a chart for near noon, because the sun is up at the top of the chart. But if you imagined over the afternoon every day the sun going here and setting, the sun would set just prior to Saturn and Mercury. So they would be visible in the night sky just for a little bit. But what I want to do is I want to back this up a few days. And we backed it up a few weeks. Let's back it up a few days. November 22nd is good. And we're going to move this a day at a time. And what I want you to do is I want you to look here at Mercury, the red planet, here at 22, and Saturn. Because Saturn is moving rather slowly, and Saturn is moving at the end of Sagittarius, where it's been for almost 3 years. And on what is it? December 19th. Yeah, on December 19th, Saturn moves into Capricorn. So Saturn is moving very slowly, because it takes almost 3 weeks for it to move just 3 degrees. Meanwhile, Mercury, if I move this a day at a time, watch Mercury as it comes closer and closer to Saturn. Well, that'll make a difference. Thanks, guys. All right, so there we're moving. There's the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th. They're at the same degree. That would be the 27th. And boom, now Mercury has moved past Saturn. You with me? On December 2nd, 3rd, depending upon where you are on the planet, Mercury turns retrograde, and we have a full moon. Oh, there's even more stuff going on. But that in itself is extraordinary, because when Mercury turns retrograde, it goes backwards from Earth's point of view for about 3 weeks. And I know many of you have heard me do this, and I'll do it very briefly. And that is, the planet doesn't go backwards. But if you've ever been on a train and you see a freight train on the other side of the valley, and you're looking at it and you're going faster than the freight train because you're in a fast passenger train, you can see against the mountains that train is moving forward, but not as fast as you are. Now, over the course of 20 minutes, these tracks get closer and closer and closer together until the freight train is right on the track next to you. And now you haven't looked out the window for a while, and you look out the window and you would bet your bottom dollar that train was going backwards. because you're going faster than it. You've all had this feeling, even if it's just a car next to you or in a subway in a city, where you look out the window and it looks like the train next to you is going backwards, but it's really going forward, not quite as fast. Are you with me? That's all a retrograde is. Every planet, every true planet, meaning not the sun and the moon, every true planet goes retrograde when it gets closest to the Earth in its normal cycle, period. So when Mercury comes between the Earth and the sun, as it does 3 times a year, it looks like it's going backwards because it's the train on the track right next to us. So normally when Mercury goes backwards, it covers about 15 to 20 degrees of space in the sky where it's already been. Normally, when it does that, it's not uncommon for it to change signs during its retrograde. But this retrograde is special because Mercury reaches on December 2nd in the evening Pacific time. It reaches 29 degrees and 18 minutes. That's almost 29 and a half degrees. And we'll move this forward one more day. And what then happens is that Mercury turns retrograde. And you'll watch this here, that Mercury right there, it says S, that means it's stationary. From Earth's point of view, it looks like it's not moving, because a planet, like a pendulum, has to stop before it changes directions. When a planet changes directions from retrograde to direct or direct to retrograde, it does what we astrologers call stations, meaning that it's stuck, it's stationary, it's Saturn, and we'll talk about the and Saturn in just a minute. So Mercury makes its station, and then it starts moving backward. And as it moves backwards, that Mercury lines up with Saturn again on December 6th. So in other words, it lined up with Saturn the first time on November 27th, 28th. Then it doesn't move into Capricorn, but it begins moving backwards. It lines up with Saturn again, turns retrograde on the 2nd or the 3rd, depending upon where you are. And then it lines up with Saturn the 2nd time on the 6th. And now watch what happens here when we continue this. Wait, it went way too fast. Okay, stop that. Okay, got away with us. All right, so now also watch the sun in here, because the sun moves about 1 degree every day, 365 days in the year, 360 degrees in a circle. So the sun takes 1 year to go all the way around, so it moves almost, not quite, a degree every day. So we have the sun moving toward this Saturn-Mercury retrograde. Saturn is going to move on into Capricorn again on the 19th, and Mercury is going to retrograde back across the sun. So we're going to just watch this happen. So the sun is getting closer. There it was on the 6th, Mercury went back across Saturn, and now Mercury is gaining speed backwards, and on the 11th or 12th, let me get the exact date, it's on the 12th, Mercury, from Earth's point of view, comes between the Earth and the sun, but it continues to move backwards. So now we can see that Mercury is moving backwards. The sun, by 1 degree a day, is getting closer and closer to Saturn. Can you see that happening? Each day, the sun is getting closer and closer to Saturn, but Mercury is backing off further. Then on the 19th and 20th, Saturn changes signs, moves into Capricorn. The sun is still getting closer to it, though. The sun, on the first day of winter, on December 21st, the sun moves into Capricorn, and within a few hours of the sun moving into Capricorn, actually within 12 hours of the sun moving into Capricorn, it also lines up with Saturn and crosses Saturn. So we'll come to that date in a bit too. But can you see here the drama being played out by Saturn moving into its own sign at the winter solstice? so that it's the same time when the sun is moving into it. The sun lines up with Saturn. Meanwhile, Mercury by the 19th, by the 22nd, Mercury turns direct. So Mercury is slowing down here on the 21st, and by the 23rd, Mercury now is moving direct again. The sun is moving away from Saturn 1 degree a day, because Saturn is just creeping along. But Mercury now begins to gain speed, and Mercury then moves, it reaches the place where it was when it first turned retrograde, and that's on January 9th or 10th. And then Mercury on the 10th moves into Capricorn, and then this is by January 10th, and then by the 12th, 13th, Mercury catches up and lines up with Saturn for the third and final time. All right, now, that was the mechanics. What the hell does this mean? A lot, because Saturn is a wall. Saturn is the outward bound or the limits of perception. I want to talk about Saturn in just a moment, but I just want to reframe these dates first, because when Mercury, the planet of thought, communication, Mercury is the fastest moving of all the true planets outside the sun and the moon. And so Mercury is considered to be the fleet-footed messenger. Someone once said that a straight line is not the shortest distance between 2 points. A thought is. That's what Mercury's job is, to connect the dots. In Gemini, that's its job. In Virgo, its job is, okay, the dot's been connected. Is it useful or not? And if it's not, it throws it away. But when Mercury, the planet of thinking, talking, communicating, intellect, lines up with Saturn, it's like we hit a limit. There's some sort of limit. We want to know, is this real or is this not real? A big problem in our day and age right now, and one that will continue to plague us. Is this real? When Mercury bumps into Saturn, Saturn says, that's crap. Go back to the drawing board and figure it out, because you got to get this right. Saturn doesn't take Mercury's cleverness, wittiness, sharp thinking, tap dancing. Saturn basically is like you need to prove what's true and what's not true to Saturn. So when Mercury gets closer and closer to Saturn, as it has over the last few days, we often bump into walls. We often find resistance. And in fact, the danger is that we can become very fixed in our thinking. We pull in and go, no, I know this is right. And so we kind of like build up our barriers to take on Dad. Dad says Saturn is Dad. That's authority. So it's like Dad says we're wrong, and we go, oh no, I'm right and I'm going to prove it. But you can't argue with that which is inarguable. Normally, that's a day or two event. But this year, because Mercury retrogrades back over Saturn again on December 6th, and then turns direct and retrogrades back over Saturn, but not until it moves into Capricorn. Right now, Mercury's in Sagittarius. All these planets right now are in Sagittarius. Let's come back to... Okay, we could do this faster. Come on. There we go. All right, so right now the Sun and Saturn and Mercury are all in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is blue sky, it's big, it's out there, and Mercury in Sagittarius is like philosophical and don't worry about being practical. I have a great idea. It's the magnifying sign. It makes everything cool. Sagittarians don't have shadows. I'm kidding, but there's that sense of the Sagittarian energy is always looking at the blue sky, even if it's in the middle of a rainstorm. There's something about the optimism of Sagittarius. But over the days ahead, when first Saturn moves into Capricorn, followed by the Sun, and then followed by Mercury, what happens is the shit gets real. Now, we may think, oh my God, isn't it real enough? I mean, have we had enough of this yet? Has this been like a year, or not? I mean, come on, uncle, or aunt, or whatever, enough. But normally, when Saturn lines up with Mercury, it's just an afternoon. It's getting a rejection letter. It's not doing as well on a test as you wanted to. It's saying something that 3 people jump down your throat for and say how stupid you were. I mean, it's something. It's some sort of resistance. It's maybe even, for me over this last week, I had like very significant writing deadlines, and I must say that I'm on the other side of them right now. But there were a couple days where it was like, oh my God, I mean, did I really do this to myself? And it was Saturn saying, yes, and this deadline is immovable, and you just need to do what you need to do to get through it. That's Saturn. However, it's not just one day. It's basically the next month and a half because of that Mercury dancing around it and then moving into it as it moves into Capricorn. You see, when Mercury moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, it has to get real anyhow. And then it bumps into Dad and goes, oh my God, didn't I just get real? Now I got to get really real? Well, the shit's going to get real. All right. So this is like a big deal thing. And now I want to back off a little bit and I want to talk about Saturn. The symbol for Saturn. This is a symbol that most of us astrologers know, but it's a symbol that we don't normally think about, and this is really what I want to talk about, because Saturn is really 2 symbols. We can almost look at it as a T and a backwards S. Can you see that? And in fact, this symbol predated the Greco-Roman, Latin, Indo-European languages. So we have the symbolic basis of all the glyphs, which are fascinating stories unto themselves, because astrology is ultimately a form of sacred geometry. And so we have 2 separate symbols here. We have one, the symbol of the cross of the material universe. We call this in astrology the cardinal cross. Interestingly, the word cardinal etymologically comes from the word henge. Henge is like a hinge, like Stonehenge. It's like a hinge. And we don't think much about hinges, but if you were living next door to Steve Jobs, 4,000 years ago, and he just invented the hinge, this was the coolest thing ever. In those days, a hinge was cooler than an iPad would be today. Why? Because you could have the structure of a wall and it opening, allowing you to walk through it, but you could then close it and it held its integrity. This is what a hinge does. And in fact, cardinal signs, the season starting signs, the cardinal signs, Aries starts spring, Cancer starts summer, Libra starts autumn in the northern hemisphere, and Capricorn starts winter. The cardinal signs are hinges. Astrologically, cardinal signs are initiations. They're the start of something new. So the cardinal cross, is basically the 90-degree angle, which gives the illusion of the 3-dimensional world, because when waves intersect at 90-degree angles, they create things that look like they have substance. This is the magic of how the illusion of subatomic high-frequency electromagnetic radiation creates something solid like steel. Steel, Saturn. So the ST part of this is really fascinating. Let me make my pen here a little bit thinner, and so the ST is really what Saturn is all about. The T part is the cross of the material universe. It's the 90-degree angle. It's the cross of Christianity. It's the cross that creates the illusion that things are real. The S part of it turned on its side is really this. It's the moon cycle. It's the animating factor. It's the sine curve. It's change. It's movement. The material cross doesn't change. That's static. Oh, another ST word. Static. The moon, however, is always changing. And astrologically, the beauty of the system is that Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, is opposite Cancer, ruled by the moon. Saturn and the moon are opposites. In fact, one is a 28-day cycle, the other is a 29-day cycle, the other is a 29-year cycle. Saturn and the moon are intimately entangled in this kind of fractal geometry of patterns, repeating patterns. It's the origin. Is there anyone here who's an astrologer that uses progressions? Secondary progressions, that basically is a day for a year. It's like the moon to Saturn, a day to a year. So the importance of this is that with the symbol of Saturn, we have that which doesn't change, and yet that which changes is nailed to the cross. And now we're going to get to talking about Christmas. Because it's that time of year. And this is a special Christmas because only once every, I don't even know how long, that right within the week of Christmas, Saturn moves into Saturn's sign the same day, or within the same few days as the sun moving into Saturn's sign, which is the time of year that we've designated as Christmas. You know, Jesus wasn't born in the middle of winter. You know, I don't care what religion you practice, but there was someone who was a historical figure. Whether you refer to him as your savior or not is your personal issue, and it's okay with me if you do. But he wasn't born in the middle of the winter. We know that. We know that because we know that there were shepherds in the fields, and they don't do that in the middle of winter. They do that in the spring and the summer and the autumn. But we also know another thing, and what we know is that the predominant religion, cult religion of the pre-Christian period of times was a religion called Mithraism. People know about Mithras? Yes, no? Yes. So that was almost right. Mithras. So Mithras, in 200 years before the birth of Jesus, Mithraism was the religion that believed that Mithras was the son of God, born of a virgin birth on the winter solstice, who was crucified, nailed to a cross, and was resurrected around the first full moon after the spring equinox. And this story and this belief system in this religion predated Jesus by 200 years. Check the history. Here's the crazy thing, and that is that the garb of the high priesthood of Mithratic followers basically is identical to what Rome adopted as the costumes of the popes and bishops and cardinals. And even the etymology doesn't lie. The word mitre comes from the word mithras. What is mitred? It's a corner. You know, anyone who's ever done carpentry, you know, it's like when you the mitred is a corner. And the mitred hats are basically the hats that were taken from the priesthood of Mithraism. The Romans celebrated a major holiday right around the time that we celebrate Christmas. Does anyone know what that holiday was?
Saturnalia.
It was the Saturnalia. The Saturnalia was like 3 or 4 or 5 days of get out of jail free. It basically, these were days that were not on the calendar. You could do shit and get away with it that you couldn't do on other days. There was role reversals where slaves became masters and vice versa. I mean, it was like basically, let's blow the cobwebs out of the corners kind of a thing. So the thing is that, that this whole idea of what happens around that winter solstice, and when the sun moves into Capricorn, this is Saturn's time of year, and even the Romans called this the Saturnalia. Now, here's what's interesting, and that is our language represents this. We speak astrologies all the time. You ever meet anyone with a sunny disposition? Someone who is loony as you know, belonged in the loony bin? How about, you know, someone who is the whole mercantile, the exchange of information or goods, martial law coming from Mars, someone who's jovial coming from Jove, Jupiter, expansive, you know, all these words. But what we don't often think about is the sound of language. And here's where it gets really weird. And that has to do with Saturn being the ST. Saturn, strict, structure, austere, stamina, steady, obstruction, resist, tests. Go ahead.
Stable.
Stable. Strenuous. Stern. Stuff. Static. Stasis. Beyond Saturn, ecstasis. Ecstasy. I used to have an engineer friend who, when I started telling him some of this stuff years ago, he used to go, God, you can't make it up this good. Here, even better. If you have a whole bunch of stuff and you want to put them in order, what do you do with them? You make a list. And that list, the most important things are first. And the other ones are Saturn. Until we developed the technology of the telescope, Saturn was the limit of awareness. You couldn't perceive anything beyond Saturn. Out past Saturn, nothing moved. It was just the fixed sphere of stars. Saturn was the limit of consciousness. You couldn't get any more. Oh, Saturn was the limit. But Saturn was things. In the English language, what part of speech do we use to talk about things? Come on, you can do this. People, places, and things. All right. Give me an example of a noun. Come on. Huh? Chair. Stick. And Saturn now. All right. So anything is a thing. A thing is, the word thing is a Saturn word. Now, if I have two things, one of them is nicer than the other. One of them is bigger or one of them is smaller. The word that describes the noun is an adjective. You didn't know you'd be getting an English lesson tonight. But it's crazy how this is so wired into our thinking. Because an adjective describes a noun. And so if we have a room, this is a big room. But if you go to that side of town, there's a place and they have a bigger room. But if you go to the stadium, to the Kingdom down, that room is the biggest. We put a Saturn on the end of anything to denote that that's the limit, because that's what Saturn's job is. It's the limit. Can't get any bigger than biggest, can't get any happier than happiest, can't get any more than most. Is this crazy? So, the reason why this is so important for us now is that we have this cluster of planets moving into Capricorn. And in fact, I said that I would refer this back to Jupiter also. And what's interesting is that although Saturn, let's do this way. Saturn is basically Jupiter upside down. Saturn is contraction, Jupiter is expansion. Saturn is contraction, Jupiter is expansion. Jupiter is optimism, Saturn is realism or pessimism. This pulse of Saturn-Jupiter is a pulse that we can measure in our calendar. Someone says, oh, I don't believe in astrology. I go, oh, you don't use the decades in the calendar? They go, what do you mean? They go, well, a decade is basically half of a Saturn cycle, Saturn-Jupiter cycle, because Saturn and Jupiter line up from Earth's point of view every 20 years, and they did so in 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980, 2000, okay, it was into just barely 2001, and they will again in 2020. They were in opposition, far apart from one another, like a full moon, in 1910, 1930, 50, 70, 90, and in 2010. This cycle of expansion-contraction defines the decades. And every decade has a different feeling to it. And so what I want to talk about is how when Saturn now moves into, let's come back to the charts. We can come back to the chart, and let's put all the planets back in. So we have all these planets moving from Sagittarius to Capricorn. Saturn takes about 2.5 years to move through Capricorn. Over the next couple of years, as Saturn moves through Capricorn, what's it going to encounter? Pluto. Saturn and Pluto line up once every 33 years or so. It varies because Pluto's orbit is so variable. And the Saturn-Pluto cycle is absolutely powerful as far as our history goes. When you look at Saturn-Pluto oppositions, conjunctions, every 16, 17 years. Oh, you see things like the beginning of World War I, the bombing of the World Trade Tower was on a Saturn-Pluto opposition. The mid-1960s, although there were other things going on, we also had a Saturn-Pluto opposition. And so we're coming up to, in 2019, 2020, 2021, we're coming up to Saturn coming up to the Pluto at the very end of Capricorn. And as Saturn moves into Capricorn in December, we will begin to get early warning flavors of what the reality is that we may be dealing with over the next several years. Ugh. Some heavy stuff coming up. Some heavy stuff. So I want to back off from all of this now. I want to add the moon aspects back in and just take a breeze through some of the important dates of the month. Now we didn't really talk about, and I want to just say a few more words about the Mercury and Mercury retrograde. What am I doing here? Aspected points, and I just want to add the moon back in there. Okay, so Mercury turns retrograde on December 2nd. And it goes direct on December 22nd, and it doesn't catch up and hit Saturn until January 10th of 2018. We are all on notice that from a couple of days ago, from the last week of November, all the way through the middle of the second week of January, we are all living in a frozen, solid, stuck Mercury retrograde and or Mercury Saturn time. Now, you may read stuff online where astrologers say this is the worst thing that ever happened. Mercury retrogrades, don't travel, don't sign contracts, don't buy anything, don't eat, don't go out of the house.
Don't open your mouth.
It's all bullshit. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't do stupid things when Mercury is retrograde, but it doesn't mean that we can't, there's a lot of negatives in there. It doesn't mean we can't do a lot of good things. The deal is this. When a planet gets closer to the Earth, the energy of that planet is louder. Mercury is communication, it's interchange, it's talking, it's listening, it's interacting, it's mercurial, it's everywhere. And when Mercury gets closer and closer to Earth and it goes retrograde, we get like so jazzed in the moment, we think that we need to do it now. And so we sign the contract before we read it. We meet someone and we get married before we find out their last name. We decide, you know what? I'd really like to buy a car. I need a car. And Mercury turns retrograde, you have an afternoon off, and you say, I'm going to go out looking, and the first lot that you go to, they have a purple Porsche. And you go, I've always wanted a Porsche, and this one's my color of purple, I'll buy it. And then you get home, and 3 days later you go, I have a dog. And a wife. Where are they going to go? What did I do? You see, what happens when Mercury is retrograde, they go, there's miscommunications. We get our signals crossed. We make a right-hand turn when we should make a left-hand turn. All these things are true to some extent. But there are things that happen when we're not paying attention because we've altered the speed of time and we think we need to do it now. And so here's the rule when when Mercury is conjuncting Saturn and turning retrograde. This is a fantastic time to build the structures of the philosophies and ideas, that would be Mercury and Sagittarius, that you've been already working on. It's not a great idea to start a new project. It's not a great time to start writing a new book. But if you've been working on a book for years or thinking about it, this is a great time to put effort into building the outline to that. So the philosophy here is that during this Mercury-Saturn, Mercury retrograde phase is to utilize the increased energy of the intellect rather than trying to push through boundaries, respecting them, working with them, and building solidity so that when Mercury turns direct on December 22nd, and then as it goes on the other side of Saturn by January 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, then whoosh, you're off. But if you tried to launch now, it may be quite frustrating because you might not get a full launch until mid-January anyhow. Okay, got it? All right, so here we are back at the beginning of whatever this month is. Okay, here we go. And I want to take this hours at a time so that we can get to there it is right there. The full moon on December 3rd, 7:46 a.m., and that's Pacific time. So that's 7, 8, 9, 10:46. Note my higher mathematics. Eastern time. The moon in Gemini is full opposite the sun in Sagittarius. We have a whole lot of Sagittarius energy here. We have Venus, which moves into Sagittarius on December 1st. On the beginning of the month, Venus, which has been in Scorpio, rather serious, intense, powerful, passionate, moves into Sagittarius, and all of a sudden we want the horizon, not the depth of the pond that we're standing in. The energy moves outward. And there's so many planets right now. There's Venus, the Sun, Saturn, and Mercury, all in Sagittarius, and although there's some restraint because Saturn is there at the end of its 2-3 year trip there, and Mercury is turning retrograde, the fact of the matter is that the moon in Gemini, opposite all of that Sagittarian stuff, is giving us the ability to communicate, to talk about it, to think about it, because that Gemini moon is very restless. It's bouncing around, bouncing off walls. There's that sense of of movement. But here's the key thing about this particular full moon. Aside from the fact that Mercury is stationary retrograde, the moon is in Gemini. Mercury is Gemini's key planet, so that Mercury retrograde is going to even be more powerful. You watch for screw-ups. Not that there aren't every hour politically these days. And by the way, I will get beat up on YouTube for that. I can't even go there. I'll get comments about that, about how I was so offensive in my politics by even saying that, but okay. But the powerful thing about this full moon is that it is at the same degree, and let's try this one more time. Yep, it is. So we have 3 planets on 4 corners of a grand square. This is astrologically called a T-square because it really is, if we do it, it's kind of like this, which is kind of like a T. And I think I can do this. Oh, I love this. This is new technology. Magic. Yay. Thank you. So this T-square with Neptune, 90 degrees. I mean, damn close. In fact, the moon actually hits that square the sun squares Neptune at 4 in the morning on the same day that the sun and the moon are opposite at the full moon. So this is like incredibly close. And what does this mean? Well, again, the moon in Mercury's sign Gemini is about communication. The sun and all those planets in Sagittarius are about our beliefs, our opinions, our philosophies, our ideas, our ideals. But they're all bumping into the wall of Mercury against Saturn. I don't care what your beliefs are, you need to rethink them. And I'm not saying that to you, I'm saying that to us. Me included, because that's part of what this is. The problem, though, is that Neptune, the planet of illusion, the planet that basically says Saturn's boundaries aren't real, don't believe them. Rob Hand, who I like to call the academic dean of astrology on the planet, brilliant person who I've known for many years, decades even. Many years ago, back in the 70s, Rob wrote something like this. It's not word for word, but it's close. He said, "It used to be said that Saturn was reality, and Neptune is the illusion beyond it. Whereas now we've come to believe that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion there is one." You see, this dance between the limits of perception, Saturn, and the belief that those limits of perception are illusions. The illusion that I am separate from you. That the illusion that the United States is separate from fill in the blank. So with Neptune square the sun and the moon, it's a time when we can be struggling with what is the truth. What is real? Now, this is not something new. This is something that's been going on for a while, and one could argue even that going back, almost a year when we had the nodes, actually the south node in Pisces lining up with Neptune, this was the first wave of the whole kind of U.S. culture fake news thingy that's now taking over everything. But this feeds into that. And this feeds into the question of what is real. And on top of that, we have another aspect that is very significant, and it's exact in the midst of this. which I thought I had written down. It's exact on December 2nd. And what I'm talking about here is Jupiter-Neptune, and this is a trine. So these are slow-moving planets. Jupiter in Scorpio for the year. And again, I know I said this last month and the month before, but this idea of Jupiter in Scorpio bringing up hidden things. And certainly the relationship between Scorpio and sex and power, you know, and all of those things coming up. And I'm reminded by a number of people in my life who remind me that Jupiter is not about an event, it's a journey. And we are only a month and a half, 2 months into Jupiter into Scorpio, and we ain't seen nothing yet. This is going to continue. This is not just something that has to do with this person or that person or that person or that person. And I could say a lot more about that, but we don't have time right now. However, I remember earlier when I was talking about the relationships between planets and signs that I said that Jupiter used to be the ruler, or I would say the planet associated with both Sagittarius and Pisces. And as such, Jupiter was about religion and beliefs and spirituality and opinions and ideas. And then Neptune came along and it was given to Pisces. So therefore, all of a sudden, Jupiter didn't have as much stay in the realm of imaginations and dreams and religion because that was kind of given off to Neptune. The fact, though, is that this Jupiter trine Neptune, trines are harmonious, the energies are flowing. It's like a superconductive open channel between them. And this trine between Jupiter and Neptune on December 2nd will repeat again because of the retrograde motions on the end of May 2018, around Memorial Day weekend, and then again on August 19th, 2018. So this flavor of this Jupiter-Neptune trine is with us right now for the long haul. I mean, we're feeling it right now, and it's an interesting thing because it actually has a flavor of some hope, of some optimism, because we get on some level that what we imagine can actually come true, which flies in the face. It's totally negated by reality right now, and that reality would be the square between the Neptune and the full moon. So you can see here we got this coming from a couple of different directions. Neptune is key. Neptune is key. On one hand, at the full moon, it's harmonizing with Jupiter, and of course we have all these planets, including Saturn, in Jupiter sign Sagittarius. The intricacies here are fascinating, and I think what this ultimately means is that it's an important time to find a place that we can go to that is a spiritual place, not be overwhelmed by the problems, the difficulties, the stuff that's happening on a political, whatever realm that we can't do anything about, but to realize that the expansion of the bigger picture basically comes back to our own individual stuff. And even when Neptune is 90 degrees to that full moon, it's like we can still hold the position, but it's hard to make sense out of it. It's hard to make sense out of what's going on during this full moon. So we move on past this full moon. We have the Mercury lining up with Saturn on the 6th. Let's get out of there. We have Mercury lining up with Saturn on the 6th that we already talked about, the retrograde Mercury. On the 5th, we also have Chiron changing directions. I've mentioned here many times that I don't spend a lot of time talking about Chiron here, not because it's not important. There I go with the double negative again. Chiron is extremely important. It's only that everything's important, and we have limited time. But the fact that Chiron on the 5th is turning direct really loosens up some of the healing energies that we may have been working with. And what's interesting is that through the month, we have Mercury squaring Chiron on the 10th. We have the Sun squaring Chiron on the 15th. Venus squaring Chiron on the 20th. There's a repetitive theme here about the coming to grips with our limitations, our wounds. Chiron is the wounded healer. It's the doctor who basically has patients that have his or her own illness. There are parts of ourselves that we can't cure, so we help other people. We ameliorate our pain by helping others. And if anyone wants to dig deeper on Chiron, there are several books that come to mind. One is by my dear friend Melanie Reinhardt. Another is a book by the Jungian psychologist named Robert Johnson, who wrote a book called The Story of the Fisher King and the Handless Maiden. It's not an astrology book, it's a psychology monograph, but the subtitle is something like a critical evaluation of the wounded feeling function in Western society. Ouch. And it's about that part of us that doesn't heal. But I think that's kind of out there this month. It really does come into being. On December 9th, Mars, which has been in Libra, moves into Scorpio. So on one hand, we have the energy moving through Sagittarius saying, expand, breathe deeper, look at the horizons, look at the distance. And then that energy goes into Capricorn, and we go, yes, but we need to make it real. We need to bring it down to earth. And at the same time, we have Mars moving into Scorpio, which intensifies and deepens the energy, and Mars actually catches up to Jupiter, but I'm not allowed to talk about it because that doesn't happen until January. But we can feel this optimism and this energy, even if it's deep stuff. Mars energizes, and Mars is at home in Scorpio. It's powerful, it's passionate, it's intense, and as it comes closer and closer to Jupiter, I think we will feel it even more and more and more. Okay, moving along, we have then Venus. On December 10th, we have Mercury squaring Uranus. Mercury squaring Uranus on the 10th. This is a bit of craziness. This is retrograde Mercury. Mercury already squared Mercury trine Uranus. Mercury already trined Uranus the end of November. Now on the retrograde, it will trine Uranus again. And in fact, I ran a separate sheet on this. Yeah, Mercury trined Uranus on the 25th of November. Turning retrograde, it will do it on December 10th. And then going direct, it will do it for the third and final time on the 6th of January. So remember I talked earlier about Mercury and Saturn. But Saturn and Uranus have been trine. And this is the magic of this time that we live in, is that there seems to be a communication working between the Saturn, which is the hardship and the holding back and the authority and the top down, and the Uranus kind of still busting through it and moving forward. And so Mercury will line up with Saturn 3 times, but it'll also trine Uranus. And this is our ticket. This is our sense of freedom, our sense of we can awaken even if the world is dumbing down. All right, moving on. On the 10th, we also have Venus squaring Neptune. Pay attention to your illusions, especially in love, especially about money, especially about what you're attracted to. Venus squaring Neptune on the 10th. Mercury retrogrades over Venus on the 15th. And again, this is one of those, Mercury joins up with Venus on the 15th, but this is a weird dance because of the retrograde. Mercury only goes over Venus retrograde. By the time it turns direct, Venus is whoosh, long gone. So it doesn't catch up with Venus again, at least in this part of the cycle. And so that Mercury-Venus is communicate about those things that are dear to you. Mercury lining up with Venus in Sagittarius is go out of your way to talk about your hopes and dreams and those things that are Sagittarian that are out of reach. Even though Mercury is retrograde, they may not happen now, but it's important to plant the seeds anyhow. That's the 15th. The 16th, the Sun trines Uranus. So we had first Mercury retrograding, and then we have on the 16th, the Sun reaching that 24-degree point, and the Sun trining Uranus. It will be followed by Venus trining Uranus. It will be followed by Venus trining Uranus, not until next month. Let's just see when that is. Venus hits, there it is, on the 20th. So we have this string of planets that are trining to Uranus, which again is about hope. And on the 21st, we have the Sun that moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, which is the winter solstice, or solstice. They're both correct. And this puts the stake in the ground. Here now, it's a different land. Even though the Saturn has moved already a couple days prior on the 18th, 19th, Saturn moves into Capricorn. When the Sun joins it and then followed by Venus, it's like things are getting real. Stuff is coming out. We will get the truth, even though it may have felt elusive for a long time about many things. We talked about the suns lining up with Saturn also on the 21st, the first day of winter here in the northern hemisphere, the first day of summer for our friends in Oz and in the south. On December 22nd, we have on December 22nd, we have Jupiter forming a half of a square to Saturn. That's not shown here, but the aspects that I draw in the middle that the program does can be set for how much noise you want or not. And there are aspects that we don't normally talk about, but the half square, a square is 90 degrees, a half square is 45 degrees, sometimes called a semi-square, is also an aspect of stress, of anxiousness. And when Jupiter, the planet of expansion, and Saturn, the planet of contraction, around these first days of winter coming exact, they're slow-moving planets, on the 22nd exact, we can also expect, even though Saturn is now saying, whoa, hold back, it's in Capricorn, and time to get real. At the same time, Jupiter's going, well, yeah, what about this? And there's more stuff happening. So it'll be an interesting few days for sure. Mercury turns direct on the 22nd also. We skipped right over. Geez, let's back this up. Let's back this up a little bit. And we skipped right over this incredibly I took the long way here. There we go. Close enough. There is on December 17th at 10:30 p.m. here in the West Coast, on the West Coast, 10, 11, 12, 1:30 a.m. the following day on the 18th in New York. The new moon in Sagittarius. That new moon in Sagittarius is falling very close to Saturn. So again, it'll have a flavor and a taste. A new moon in Sagittarius should be get in your private plane, get in your Cessna, and go. It's the jump and the wings will appear. Well, don't, because they won't. I'm not saying that we shouldn't take risks in our lives that are worthwhile and calculated. I'm just saying that this Sagittarius moon is a bit different because it's harmonized. It's trine with Uranus. It's exciting. Things are happening, but at the same time, there's a heavier weight that's still, what's that saying? It's you have to wait for the other shoe to fall. So that's a little bit of a flavor about this particular new moon. And then as we move on past this new moon, we then have the sun moving in. We talked about that, followed by Venus moving into Capricorn on the 21st. Venus moving into Capricorn on the 24th. This is on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Day, Venus lines up with Saturn. All right. Wow. Now, I wrote my dailies for this day last week. And it was interesting trying to frame a holiday upbeat feeling when Venus, the planet of love and beauty and money and nice things, is lined up with the Saturn, the planet that says no. But I think there is a hidden, powerful piece of good news here. And that is, it's not about looking for happiness in the things we don't have. It's not about reaching for something else. I'm not saying we shouldn't reach, but that Venus conjunct Saturn, it's about loyalty. It's about seeing things the way they are. It's not about the Neptune glamour, cosmetic, imaginative, romantic beauty of love. That would be Neptune Venus. Saturn Venus is about what's real. It's don't give me any crap. Let's just deal with it the way it is. And that love is sometimes put into a secondary place in our culture and society. And I think here that what we have on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day is the potential for being in touch with wasn't Trungpa, Thich Nhat Hanh, I think, once Buddhist teacher in France. The Vietnamese Buddhist, said something like, the magic isn't turning, water into fire, or isn't turning fire, earth into air. The magic is walking on earth. And there's something about this Venus-Saturn conjunction on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day that's just basically, make it real. Keep things within reach. And if you do that, then there's a tremendous amount of satisfaction, of love, of depth, of power in being in the present moment and keeping it real. And then, of course, as we get closer to the new year, we go out with saying, oh yeah, I was just kidding, let's get crazy. No, it's actually what happens, it's not really crazy, is on the 27th, Mars in Scorpio forms a harmonious trine with Neptune, and this brings back in the illusion, back in the dance of the magic. In other words, the magic isn't necessarily lost on Christmas Day, because we're coming into this even 2 or 3 days prior to this Mars trine Neptune on the 27th. Even a few days earlier, while Venus is lining up with the sun, we'll still have the sense of Mars, our physicality, our where we're going, the what we're doing, and still is tied up intimately with Neptune, the planet of there's magic beyond the what is. That there is reality to spirit, to dreams, imagination. So it's not all one or the other, but it's an interesting dance at the end of the year, because it's almost like we need to get real, and then we need to kind of space out. And speaking of spacing out on that day, we will be here again on that evening, because that will be the last Wednesday of December. That will be on December 27th. We will be here. We'll talk about the last few days of the year and then talk about 2018. Also, I want to mention that the January get together here will not be the last weekend of the month. It'll be the week before that. And I'll put that on my website and Facebook, and we'll talk about that again next month. But I will be in India the last Wednesday of January. So that kind of brings us full circle. And I think really, there's a couple of keys that we need to keep in mind for December. Number one is there's a lot of feeling of reaching finality because of Saturn's move into Capricorn and because of Mercury's retrograde dance around Saturn. There's a lot of heaviness, and yet it ain't over. You know that saying, it ain't over till it's over? Well, I got good news and bad news for you, because it ain't over even when it's over. It ain't ever over. And certainly, this movement of Saturn into Capricorn, just like Jupiter's movement into Scorpio a couple of months ago, this is a very distinct shift in flavor of what's going on in our lives, in our world. And I think it'll take us several months to get a sense of what unfolds. I mean, a few months ago, before Jupiter moved into Scorpio, who could have imagined what would have happened, on this whole, thing of gender equanimity might be a good word. The issue of how much stuff Scorpionic has Jupiter brought out into the open. I mean, in my talk the month before Jupiter moved into Scorpio, I put the right words around it, but I had no idea that it was going to be that. And we talked about how Jupiter brings hidden stuff out into the open, and stuff that has to do with intimacy and sexuality and power, but still, I had no idea. Now, although I've used, the words around Saturn moving into Capricorn, it's about a return of making real goals and following through. When Saturn was in Sagittarius for the last couple of years, we all looked at mountaintops and said, that's where I want to be. That time is over in December. Instead of looking at mountaintops and saying that's where I want to be, it's now I'm making a checklist and I'm thinking and I got maps, and I'm now thinking what's my calculations? How am I going to get there? What do I need resource-wise? When am I going to arrive? It's like instead of being ideas about distant horizon, where now it's the nitty-gritty. It's the time to get into it. Saturn in Capricorn is about ambition, but it's about and calculation, but it's about making it happen. So we have our work cut out for us, and it's going to be an interesting holiday season. Okay, they all are, but this one is interesting because of of how much we're being forced to go inner and deeper, and how much we're having to get real. It's not just another year where we can just replay the old tapes and have the dreams that we once had. We have to take that information and do something with it and bring it into our lives and make it real. Make it real. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you next month.